Okay, it's time to shape our piece of cane now. I just pulled this out of the water. It soaked for about 20 minutes. And the first thing I'm going to do is grab a razor blade. And I'm going to grab a hardware store razor blade as opposed to the gem razor blades that I normally use for all other reed making steps. And that's because these are thicker and stronger blades, and they won't bend or fold around our shaper tip. And we get a really true shape that way. So the first thing we're going to do is fold this piece of cane in half. And how we're going to do that is with a razor blade. And we're going to find the center of the piece of cane and slowly begin to fold over this razor blade until we get two small crimps on either side of the piece of cane. At that point, we're going to take it off the razor blade and fold it by hand. And this is an extremely important part to me for getting tight sides. As we can see, there's no rounded edge here. It's a really crisp meeting point at the top here. And we already have tight sides, and we haven't even shaped yet. So this is a really important part of the process, I think. So the next thing we need to do is put it on our shaper tip, but it doesn't fit because it's too large. So we're going to need to grab our knife, and for this I use my reed knife, which is a beveled knife, and I'm going to pare down the sides as evenly as possible. So whatever I take off one side, I'm taking off the exact same amount of cane on the other side. And that's because we want to make sure our gouge stays centered so that the thickest part of the piece of cane is always in the middle. And you'll start to get a feel for this the more times you do it. So this is a pared down piece of cane now that will fit right over our shaper tip. And the shaper tip I'm using today is a Mac Pfeiffer, which I really like. So I'm going to shape it at the top of the ears because I like on this shape my reeds to be a little bit wider at the thread. And this is a way to achieve that, is to shape at the top of the ears. If you don't want that, or you want the more true shape, you can push this piece of cane all the way down, like so. I'll give you an example. And that's absolutely fine too. But I like the top of the ears on this shape. And I encourage you not to listen to people who say that there's a right way or a wrong way to do it, and to experiment for yourself and find out what you prefer with your shaper tip. So this next step, before we screw this down tight and clamp the piece of cane into place, I want to just make sure at the top I'm really centered left to right. And then at the bottom, I can shift this piece of cane like this to make sure that these grains of the cane are completely vertical and that the piece of cane is on totally straight. So this side to me looks really good, and I'm just going to check the other side, and I can move this over just a hair to the right, and now that looks really good to me also. So now we just need to tighten this up, and a good amount of pressure can be necessary for some shaper handles. We don't want this piece of cane to be sliding around, but you don't want to make it too tight where you can risk cracking the piece of cane. So now it's time to actually do the shaping process. And here I want to make sure my hand is actually touching the table, so we have a really solid base. So if anything slips when we're applying pressure, you're not going to be going any distance It's going to be a very small movement if something were to happen or if some pressure gets suddenly released. If you're sort of hovering and something goes wrong, you can really hurt yourself, and you can also take a gouge out of this piece of cane. So we're going to try and shape this piece of cane with actually 2 razor blades. And it may seem wasteful, but it's a really important step that can't be overlooked. So the first thing we're going to do is actually start with the razor blade in the very corner, totally flat. And I'm going to slide the razor blade while maintaining an even pressure all the way down. And so now I've used half of this razor blade on this one side, and we're almost completely done here. So I'm going to flip over and do the same thing. This sliding motion, make sure that a fresh piece of the razor blade is making contact with the piece of cane at all times. So now we have a pretty well-shaped piece of cane, but we're going to take our second razor blade now and go over it one more time without that sliding motion and just get, hopefully, one smooth curl of cane off, and just make sure that we're perfectly matching the shaper tip with our piece of cane. And hardly any is coming off at this point because we did a really good job shaping with that first razor blade. So the next thing we're going to do, and I'll zoom in, is just visually check that this piece of cane is perfectly mirroring the shaper tip. And one way to do that is to actually focus on this lower blade. And from this angle, you can really see if there's anything that goes in or that sticks out that you missed. So I can check this corner, and then this corner, and this corner. And that all looks really good to me. And we can also use our finger and feel. But really, we want to just make sure that there's no dips in or divots out of this piece of cane, that we're perfectly mirroring this shaper tip. And at that point, we're all done. And we can take this off.